Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. It's the weekend, so as usual we have a foreign affairs heavy video, and we will begin by moving through developments in US-China relations from this week, before moving into the second part of this video looking at a Chinese honey trap story, which is why I've switched out my usual mug for a beautiful Chinese woman. I thought it would be fitting considering the topic. Let's begin. This week, UK-based Financial Times broke the story that US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will hold a private meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister and top diplomat Wang Yi this weekend. The agenda for the meeting is unknown, but the talks look to be part of communications in a back channel that has been critical to stabilize relations. Sullivan will meet Wang in Thailand, reports the outlet, citing 2 unnamed sources, in their first meeting since President Joe Biden met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in San Francisco in November. Meanwhile, this week the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology told reporters that the US will work with China on the safety of artificial intelligence systems in the coming months, explaining that despite bilateral trade tensions over AI, the countries would work together to lessen its risks and access its capabilities, adding, quote, "Steps have been taken to engage in that process. We have to try to work with Beijing," end quote. Then on Thursday, the Chinese Defense Ministry told a press briefing that the militaries of China and the United States are currently discussing and coordinating the next meeting under the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement, adding that it will release information in due course. This is part of the ongoing efforts to restore high-level military communications, which was agreed upon at the Biden-Xi meeting in San Francisco last year. These, of course, are all positive developments in stabilizing the highly competitive US-China relationship, ensuring some degree of safety rails. Now let's move to a subtopic within the relationship, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. The US has been pushing Beijing to do more, both in verbal support of the US, as well as putting private pressure on Iran to rein in their proxies. As we have seen in recent weeks, however, China has been quite hesitant to get involved, even though the disruptions to trade hurt Chinese interests quite hard, arguably harder than the US. However, this week China does seem to be shifting its public attitude towards the Houthis somewhat. Several US outlets reported this week that in meetings earlier this month in Washington, China's Liu Jianchao, head of the Party International Department and the likely new next foreign minister, and US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his deputy John Feiner discussed the Red Sea issue. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also raised it at the time. The New York Times reports that US officials said there was little evidence China had put any pressure on Iran to restrain the Houthis beyond a mild statement Beijing issued last week calling on relevant parties to ensure safe passage for vessels sailing through the Red Sea. UK-based Financial Times adds in its own reporting, quote, US officials had hoped Beijing would take action because it viewed the Houthi attacks as a menace to its own commercial interests, given that the Red Sea was a critical route for Chinese exports to Europe, end quote. In response to these reports on Wednesday, PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin expressed to reporters in Beijing, quote, "We are deeply concerned over the recent rapid escalation of tensions in the Red Sea. The Red Sea is an important international trade route for goods and energy. China has been in close communication with various parties and worked actively to alleviate the tension in the Red Sea. China calls for a stop of causing disruption to civilian ships and urges relevant parties to avoid adding fuel to the fire in the Red Sea and jointly safeguard the safety of the Red Sea shipping route in accordance with the law. It must be stressed that the tension in the Red Sea is a manifestation of the spillover of the Gaza conflict. The priority now is to end the fighting in Gaza as soon as possible to avoid further escalation and prevent the situation from getting out of control," end quote. So as you can see, China is very much using mild language and taking a sit-on-the-fence position between the two sides. However, 2 days later, on Friday, yesterday, the language became a little firmer, with the same spokesperson expressing, quote, "We are concerned about rising tensions in the Red Sea. We urge the cessation of attacks and harassment against civilian ships, and we urge all parties to stop fueling the tensions," end quote. The same day, Friday, yesterday, the Pentagon said that a US destroyer had shot down a ballistic missile fired towards it from a Houthi-controlled area of Yemen. Then today, Saturday, the US-based Wall Street Journal reports that, according to an Iranian official and an Iranian government advisor, in conversations in Tehran and Beijing, Chinese officials asked their Iranian counterparts to rein in their Yemeni ally. Iran officials, the outlet reports, told the Chinese that they weren't in control of the group and that, quote, turmoil in the region would end if Israel agreed to a ceasefire, end quote. China is Iran's biggest oil buyer, giving it leverage on the heavily sanctioned country. But leverage, of course, is not control, and the nature of the relationship is complex. Last year, Beijing also brokered a deal to normalize relations between Tehran and Saudi Arabia after years of tensions. China hasn't commented directly on its talks with Iran. Next up, we have one more China-US update to cover, and then we move on to honey traps and espionage. But just quickly, if you are enjoying today's video or getting some value from it, I have a huge favor to ask, and that is to like and subscribe. This is only 2 clicks of the mouse, but it is a huge help for me, and it's the best way, along with sharing the video, of course, to help the channel grow. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. The channel relies primarily on subscribers to keep going. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Let's continue. Okay, one more US-China update to cover. This one is related to the ongoing technology competition between the two sides. US-based Bloomberg reports that Dutch chip-making machine company ASML found ways to get around US export restrictions and continue selling its immersion deep ultraviolet lithography machines for months last year after the US thought it had worked out a deal with the Dutch government to block these sales. Quote, the deal, which hasn't been reported before, stumbled as ASML turned to Beijing to compensate for weak demand elsewhere. The Dutch government permitted more shipments, allowing China to soak up on the gear before new US brokered export restrictions came into force this month. Originally intended as a stopgap before these restrictions took effect, the agreement was meant to give priority to shipments of the company's immersion deep ultraviolet lithography machines to markets outside of China, end quote. Adding that the global downturn pushed ASML to successfully lobby The Hague for export licenses to China of critical semiconductor manufacturing kit. Quote, dashing US officials' expectations that the deal would limit deliveries, end quote. Now, while we are on technology competition and trade tensions between the US and China, let's end part 1 with a statement made by billionaire Tesla owner Elon Musk on an earnings call on Wednesday this week. Quote, the Chinese car companies are the most competitive car companies in the world, so I think they will have significant success outside of China depending on what kind of tariffs or trade barriers are established. Frankly, I think if there are not trade barriers established, they will pretty much demolish most other companies in the world, end quote. We should expect more trade barriers then, especially from the Europeans, and a similar reaction from Beijing. The US already has Trump-era tariffs on Chinese cars coming in at approximately 20%, but there are talks now within the Commerce Department of increasing these to around 40%. Next up, in an interesting move, the Ministry of State Security, China's counter-espionage, spying and secret police agency, published a story this week about a state-owned employee, surnamed Li, who has been arrested for espionage after being turned following a honey trap operation while on a work trip overseas. The article doesn't disclose which country Li went to. This is the first time that the secretive MSS has disclosed details of a successful honey trap operation against a Chinese target, and the article acts as a salacious cautionary warning to a domestic audience. The article is quite something, especially considering it's been published directly from China's Chief Intelligence and Secret Police Agency. Here's a taste of it. Quote, bang, bang, bang. A series of rapid knocks on a door startled Li Si, who was deep in the embrace of a foreign beauty's tender lands. Boom! The door to the room was suddenly burst asunder, and several uniformed, burly foreigners stormed in. They loudly intimidated Li Si, who was completely naked, and took several photos with a camera. They then roughly dragged Li Si, still in bed, and gestured for him to follow them. Li Si's legs were weak, and he was unable to resist, so he was forced to comply. Not long after, Li Si was taken into a conference room. The other party directly revealed their identity as members of a certain country's spy organization. They threatened to send Li Si's compromising photos to his workplace leaders and colleagues, forcing Li Si to join their spy organization and provide them with intelligence. Shocked and terrified, Li Si, eager to end this nightmare as soon as possible, reluctantly agreed. End quote. The article then claims that Li was then coerced into sharing 10 years worth of state secrets and working with them after his return to the People's Republic of China. The article concludes with tips for what to do when, quote, approached by a spy organization abroad, end quote. We'll list a few of them here. 1. Maintain a high level of vigilance in thought. Keep oneself clean and upright. 2. Do not casually accept invitations when there is uncertainty about the organizing body. 3. In the face of overt recruitment attempts, ignore, do not respond, and do not be fooled. 4. If framed or falsely accused, do not panic or be afraid. 5. If asked to join their spy organization, delay or refuse with appropriate reasons, and promptly report to the relevant departments. 6. In cases of suspected spy recruitment or subversion, report to the authorities as soon as you are free. The piece then ends by saying, quote, can one redeem oneself after being forced to join a spy organization? Yes. According to Article 55 of the Counter-Espionage Law, those who are coerced or deceived into joining a spy or hostile organization abroad and engage in activities that endanger the national security of our country can avoid prosecution if they promptly explain their situation truthfully to our overseas institutions or directly through their organization report to the national security authorities upon entry into the country and show signs of repentance. End quote. This is quite the article. Commentators have been curious why the previously very secretive Ministry of State Security has chosen to suddenly publish these kind of stories and to be so active on social media in the past year or so. Alex Joske, a consultant and MSS expert at McGrath-Nicol, believes, quote, this greater publicity reflects an increase in the Ministry of State Security's political status, not just its comfort with speaking publicly, but actually the political backing to make statements on behalf of the government. End quote. Analysts say the growing public profile of the Ministry of State Security is part of Xi Jinping's increasing focus on security, especially with growing geopolitical tensions with the US and its allies, as well as an economic slump at home. In a piece this week called China's Feared Spy Agency Steps Out of the Shadows, UK-based The Financial Times writes that other experts said China's economic slump could be feeding into the strengthening of the state's security services, as authorities fear financial risks, including high debt among local governments and enterprises, could spread into social unrest. And then quotes Xu Chenggang, senior research scholar at Stanford University's Center on China's Economy and Institutions, who expressed, quote, the Chinese economy is in pretty bad shape. The Chinese Communist Party realizes this danger and realizes that if a financial crisis occurred, it could be catastrophic. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Saturday, have a nice weekend. There may be an extra episode tomorrow. There is quite a lot still to cover from this week, so I will either see you tomorrow or on Monday.